Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay with the mic like this? Okay. Can everybody else hear me okay, or should I hold the mic? We're good in the back of the room? Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Leonard Bernard. I'm the Regional Planner for the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia. I've been on the job about a year and a half, and I am the Bicycle Coalition's first full-time suburban-only employee. So we have a lot of employees that do city work. I only work on suburban roads and the circuit trails, both in Philadelphia and in our suburban region in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Today's presentation is going to be about the circuit and the circuit trails progress specifically in Delaware County and how we can best leverage that progress to create a safer transportation network for Delaware County and also create more recreational opportunities and access to nature in Delaware County. So let's get started. I want to tell you a little bit about the Bicycle Coalition, and then I will introduce each panelist. And we're going to have brief presentations. I have given these guys kind of a hard time before we started about keeping the presentations nice and short so that we have plenty of time for questions and answers. Given that, please hold on to your questions until we're done. We're going to have each person go individually. We're going to have a brief panel discussion. And then we're going to have roughly half of the presentation time at the end for questions and answers. So there'll be plenty of time to get to everybody's questions. So Bicycle Coalition, a lot of folks don't know, we've been around for about 46 years. This was an idea that was hatched in the mind of 3 or 4 people in a bar across the street from 30th Street Station in the 70s. And at that time, folks who were around to remember that, I was not. It was not a very bike-friendly atmosphere. The advocacy wins were through things like die-ins on the Walnut Street Bridge, if people remember that, to try to get a bike lane installed. There was a lot of banging at the gates to say cycling is important, shaking sort of people by the lapels to realize that people were dying in the streets and our streets need to be made safer for all users. And over 46 years, we've had a lot of successes to where now we kind of have a seat at the table. Now, we're getting invited by developers to ask us if the trail they designed on their development meets circuit trail standards. And people are reaching out to us to say, what do you think about our township's bike ped plan? So we've made a lot of progress, and these are some of the wins that we've had over our 46 years. For example, we put a lot of work into getting MLK Drive closed on the weekends during the warm months. There was quite a lot of opposition to that. Folks may not know that. Getting the city of Philadelphia to adopt a Vision Zero policy and then holding them accountable for making progress on that policy, not just to have a sort of empty document. But most notably, and in my opinion, the biggest win we've had in the history of our organization is the last one, the speed camera bill. This will put speed cameras on Roosevelt Boulevard, and not at a few key intersections, but along the entire length of Roosevelt Boulevard, which is the most dangerous roadway in Pennsylvania. And it, of course, goes right through several lower income neighborhoods, several very dense neighborhoods, and leads to people speeding in the surrounding neighborhoods as well. These speed cameras, if it really works, is going to change the paradigm of how Roosevelt Boulevard works and change the way the traffic network works in those surrounding cities. And as it becomes successful, we're going to start advocating to put speed cameras around every school and every senior center in the city of Philadelphia, to where we can not just have this on a few key intersections or just on Kelly Drive, where we can start really making key changes to Philadelphia's road network. What we're really hoping is as that changes, we're going to start to see a lot of suburban communities say, hey, well, we have similar problems. Can we get that here as well? And this bill, passed by a Republican legislature to benefit Philadelphia, is sort of paved the way for this to be able to happen all over the state. And with that, I will hand it over to Steve Beckley of the Delaware County Planning Department.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Steve Beckley. I'm a senior planner with Delaware County. What we do with the planning department and what guides our planning is our comprehensive plan. And the framework plan was done in 2013. And from that come these various element plans. The first one of those was the Open Space and Greenway Plan in 2015. Now the 3-volume plan, volume 2 is for a countywide greenway network where we plan conceptually for trails that cross the county. There are many other local trails that can stem off from those, and we encourage that. but these are the highest priority trails to be planned across the county, and this map shows the status of various sections of these trails. The primary trail network, some of them are designated as circuit trails because they meet the standards of the Circuit Coalition, but not every trail. These sections I'm going to be talking about in the next few minutes, and these are parts of the primary trail system in the circuit that are engaging in development various status at this time. So as you can see, there's lots of planning and development activity that's going on, more than ever in Delaware County, and that's thanks in part to our comprehensive plan and the plan for open space and greenways. First thing is probably what people would call our flagship trail at this point, the Chester Creek Trail. The first phase of that trail, it exists now at this point, but there has been a feasibility study in place since 2002. And that is a 6.8 mile portion of a formal rail line that has been out of service since the 70s, and that's on the border of Middletown, Aston Townships, parts a little bit in Chester Heights and in the Chester Township at the south end. But that orange-yellow portion is the existing part. Phase 1 opened spring 2017. Phase 2 is the part that we have a DCNR grant for design, and we're just contracting with a consultant at this point. And Phase 3, Middletown Township led the securing of funds, but Delaware County will be proceeding with the administration of those funds, and Delaware County is going to be overseeing the management and maintenance of the trail into the future for this whole 6.8 mile portion here. South of Phase 2 is another part of Phase 2 that was in the feasibility study that we're calling Phase 2B at this point, future phase, and that will lead down into Chester City, and that's not part of the original feasibility study, but Chester City is planning a trail along the creek that will eventually connect to the East Coast Greenway, and they're actually meeting on, having a public meeting on Monday night for their citywide Greenway plan that includes that Chester Creek Trail, the East Coast Greenway, and other trails. There's some pictures from Phase 1. On the other side of the county is the Darby Creek Stream Valley Trail, and this Darby Creek Stream Valley Park Master Plan was a revision of an old study from 1987, but the new revision was done in 2009 with the help of a consultant. It's a 5-mile trail going from Rosemont Avenue in Upper Darby down through 5 or 6 different municipalities into Darby Borough, Lansdowne, Yeadon, Alden, and Clifton Heights. The yellow portion is the part, the blue portion just upstream of the yellow trail. It's Phase 1 that has been constructed. Goes from the county's Kent Park to the Swedish Cabin. There's a more close-in view. So that was opened earlier this year. The next portion in the county has design engineering funds, and we're contracting with consultant Michael Baker to do that, and that will turn the bend and connect to the existing Lansdowne Gateway Trail, which goes down to Hoffman Park. That's where it will continue from the middle of Kent Park. The East Coast Greenway is a major trail that goes through the industrial zone paralleling the Delaware River in Delaware County, and there are 6 municipalities across that area. The current project at Delaware County is to figure out the possibilities for getting those municipalities to work together and how to manage the structure of the trail and make it consistent in its design and look throughout the area. The report will be finished by the end of this year. Hereford Township is leading a few trail projects along the circuit. One of them is to extend to the north and south an existing trail along Darby Creek. And this shows the southern portion. They have to go around the private residence there, and I think they're going to be proposing to go across into Markell Township and back again to go around that property using bridges. And the trail will go down and meet at the Upper Darby boundary. And then north of the existing trail, they need to cross Westchester Pike Route 3, and they're going to be proposing to go underneath it with an underpass. And then the trail will continue along Darby Creek up to the Haverford Reserve recreational area. And then over on the Newtown Square Branch right-of-way, they have the existing Pensy Trail, and they're designing another short portion that goes south, and they will be putting a new bridge where an old rail bridge used to exist across Manoa Road. And up in Radnor Township is a very successful Radnor Trail that Radnor Township constructed back in 2005, and they want to extend that trail a little bit further to the east, and this is consistent with the Valley Forge to Hines Refuge Trail study that was done a couple years ago, and they're designing that at this point, and they just received some funds from DCED to help construct that trail, and the first part of that will be an underpass under Radnor Chester Road that will go into a wooded open space called Martha Brown Woods, a school district property. And out west in Concord Township has taken the lead on some circuit trails, Octororo Trail and the Garnet Valley Greenway feasibility study. And that's on the Pico right-of-way. You can see that leads from the Octororo Trail all the way down to the East Coast Greenway conceptually. This is an image from their Greenway study that they did in 2016, and the township engineer Pannoni was the consultant on all of these projects. They did the township-wide plan, and then they did the feasibility study for Octororo, and they're doing a design and build project for the most feasible phase of that, and then at the same time they're doing a feasibility study for the Garnet Valley Greenway along the Pico line. And now in Chadsworth Township, on the western edge of the Octororo line, we're doing something called the High Trail and Bridge. That's a Brandywine Conservancy project. And the Walkable Chad's Ford, which is a implementation of the Chad's Ford Village Master Plan along Baltimore Pike. And then this is a non-circuit trail, but it is an important part of the Delaware County's primary trail, Medius Medley Connector Trail. And that's something that Delaware County Planning Department is doing. That will connect the Ridley Creek Valley to the Crum Creek Valley and 3 county parks. And then transportation plan is another element of the comprehensive plan, and that was done in 2017. And the goal of that plan is to make it safer and easier to integrate all modes of transportation, which includes freight and goes all the way down to pedestrian and bicycling. Part of that was that the planners of the planning department did an inventory of the sidewalk system in the county, and that will help us a lot going forward to look at projects. And there's a pedestrian and bicycle network. A goal of ours is to integrate bicycling and cycling routes throughout the county, including trails and on-road systems. One of the actions is for the planning department to assist municipalities going forward to do their own municipal bicycle and pedestrian plans. We want to identify places to implement projects for complete streets, and the main areas that we're going to be looking at are areas where there's a lot of crashes going on, where different modes come into conflict. And we want to identify appropriate levels of bicycle and car parking, and areas for bicycle parking would include a lot of destinations, including the regional rail stations. And that's about it for me. If you go to our website, you can look at a lot of these plans and other plans that I haven't mentioned. I encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Question? Oh, yeah, just we're going to have questions. We're going to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Everybody, this is John Paulson from Friends of the Chester Creek Branch.
Good morning. I'm the treasurer of the Friends of the Chester Creek Branch, and our organization, along with Delaware County, brought you the trail. All right. So, the trail is 2.7 miles. It's mostly in Middletown Township with a little bit in Aston. It's part of the circuit trails. We will go south into Aston, eventually connecting to the East Coast Greenway, and we built the hardest section of the trail first. It has one tunnel, several culverts, We've redecked 4 major bridges, built 1 new bridge, and, whoop, I didn't need to do that. Nope, this is the longest bridge, it's several hundred yards. This is the tunnel that we built on Milton Road. Here are 2 other bridges that we've redecked. Here's a 4th and a 5th. Here's the bridge that we built, and this is the $1 million washout that we had to fix that caused the trail to. We've already seen maps, we won't go through that one. Now, this is my Frankenstein map. I was looking for a map that showed all the trail connections that were central to the Chester Creek Trail. And in this case, I couldn't find one, so through the magic of software, I was able to put this together. So here's phase 1, and in this phase, we're already connecting to the Starch Mill Trail, the Linville Trail, and the Indian Orchard Trails. Phase 2 will be down here. Phase 3 will go up towards Baltimore Pike, and a couple hundred yards over Baltimore Pike are the trails in this township, the Middletown Township trails. They connect to Tyler Arboretum, which has another 20 miles of trails, and that connects contiguously to River Creek State Park. Going to the south, we've already talked about Chester City Trails and the East Coast Greenway. We've already talked about the Octorara branch. So from this section and that section, that could be 16 miles of paved trails and a total of 40, maybe even 50 miles of contiguous trails, some of which are paved, some of which would be walking only. So a little bit of history. The rail line was built just after the Civil War. Hurricane Agnes washed it out in '72. In the early 90s, Mike Fusco, our founder, visited the Pinellas Trail in Florida and said, gee, there's an unused rail line next door. Let's build one there. And he worked on it for 23 years. This is a station along the original line, and here's where we were pulling up the rails. In 1997, we became a separate organization, and we had groundbreaking in 2015. And during the ceremony, some guy was running past us on the unbuilt trail, but recently cleared, so it was that popular already. In 2016, we completed phase 1. Whoops, I'm not doing this well. 2016, we completed phase 1, and Aston Township agreed to move forward with the feasibility study. So we had a ribbon cutting in April of 17, and all the township officials were there and took credit for almost everything. So this is what it looks like. We have every conveyance you can think of: bicycles, skateboards, rollerblades, cross-country skiing, strollers, wheelchairs. Isn't that pretty? Look at that. And yes, that is my wife cross-country skiing. I didn't put myself in. Within a few weeks, the trail was already attracting business. A bakery was advertising there. They were up the hill, and a couple of enterprising young fellows were selling water on a warm day. And that's what trails do. They bring people together. Well, we had some legal challenges. We had a Aston Township commissioner who has since passed away, who was employed by a business that was encroaching on the trail. And every time we tried to get in front of Aston, he would shoot it down. And most recently, in 16, we stacked a meeting full of the cross-country team, old, young, men, women. Everybody sang the praises of it, and they still shot it down. A month later, an article in the newspaper pointed out that they had given up almost $500,000 worth of funding, and I don't know if that was important, but a month later, they came to the table. Another issue was the Linville farm. We needed a place to put some water runoff, and it was on their farm, and they were very demanding for various amenities, and we were able to get, I had to use 2 different lawyers, and we got the thing signed 3 hours before the last possible Middletown Township meeting to approve it, which is before the last possible Delaware County meeting to approve it, before $500,000 worth of funding ran out. And Lou Huffnagel, your predecessor, had to drive the signed documents to Harrisburg in person to make sure that the funding was secured. I have another minute or two, right? So,
About 1 minute.
1 minute? All right, so future issues, parking. This is people stacked up on an area that's no longer available. We're working with Delaware County and Middletown Township on a couple of places to add parking. It's a great problem to have, by the way. We've already talked about expanding Phase 2 into Aston South, Phase 3 towards Wawa, connecting to the Octorara line. This is a DVRPC plan for 2 possible routes. This is the one that we think that will work the best. It only covers 3 different properties, partially a railroad trail, and then a few other properties in Thornbury. And this would be the Octorara branch. Another possibility is they go through the Franklin Mint property. And I'll leave you with 2 pictures of our founder, who passed away at age 56. The very last thing he did was sign the Delaware County contract. And the last picture of him alive is a month before he died on the trail while we were talking trail business. Thank you for your attention, and we'll go to the next one.
Hello, I'm Sean McIntosh. I'm from Upper Darby. Started Friends of Upper Darby Trails, kind of following in the footsteps of what Haverford and Chester were doing. Fairly new group. Upper Darby is right next to Philadelphia, and we have 3 major trails that run through Upper Darby that would connect to Philadelphia, connect Philadelphia to the Delaware County and some of the other suburbs. The 3 sections that we have run along Darby Creek. They run along the Cobbs Creek, Nailers Run, and there's another smaller creek, Collin Brook. So Darby Creek is on the Circuit Trail. We recently just got our first paved trail in Upper Darby at the Kent Dog Park, up at the top corner. There's going to be 2 big developments happening on Darby Creek, and luckily we were able to work with the developers. So while they're coming in and putting in new buildings, they're going to be putting trails on the backside of their development. One is the Drexel Line Shopping Center that's being redone at State Road and Township Line. The other is Drexel Brook. They're building a hotel there, and part of the plans in building the new hotel is to put a trail along that section. And Darby Creek stretches all the way down to Little Flower Manor, which is another county-owned park that they recently purchased. And that was going to be developed a few years back, but luckily the county has come in and purchased it. It will be kept as green space. So this is the southern border of Upper Darby. Running kind of in the center is Nailers Run. This runs underneath a Pico right-of-way. It used to be a trolley branch. It seems like all the creek lines in Upper Darby are either along the creeks or abandoned trolley lines. This had a feasibility study done, I think, 7 or so years ago. It's kind of stalled out, but the good thing, at least the majority of this trail is publicly owned, so it's mostly a matter of funding at the moment. And then this would connect directly into Philadelphia, to Cobbs Creek Trail. Collin Brook is another small little section of Upper Darby. It's one of the last little pockets of forest left in Upper Darby. About 50% of it is publicly owned. There's a really cool old farm in the top section of it. There's a church that's been very helpful with Friends of Upper Darby Trails in the bottom of the picture. And then, let me turn on the pointer. This section right here is still privately owned, but we're hoping in the near future we can get this section of land purchased to become either a county or a township park. So we can talk with township and county government about this. Just so all these neighborhoods here would have, this would be mostly dirt walking trails and would potentially connect into the historic farm that's right here. And this is across the street from Drexel Line, and this connects to the major Darby Creek Trail, which is the paved trail. This is the Forge to Refuge Trail. It runs along the northern border of Upper Darby, all the way out to the Valley Forge, and then hopefully eventually down to John Hines. Doesn't really come into Upper Darby much. I think there's one section right here where it briefly comes into Upper Darby, but there are a lot of Upper Darby residents that would be able to use this trail. And there has been talks for a while with Milburn, which is this tiny municipality next to Upper Darby, that they're going to be redeveloping the Sears lot. And hopefully if that ever gets redeveloped, part of the redevelopment effort, we can get a trail in through that section. Now this development has kind of stalled, but hopefully sometime in the future that'll, if it is developed, at least get a trail along it to help connect the Forge to Refuge Trail. It's also got a trolley stop here. It's one of the ADA compliance stop, has an elevator there. That's pretty much it for me.
So I'm going to get into the last trail before we go to Q&A. So how many over here have heard of the East Coast Greenway? How are you? We are at the Philly Bike Expo. What's that?
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Daniel Pascal. I'm with the East Coast Greenway Alliance, but it's good to know that folks already know about the Greenway. Go into it a little bit more, but it is a 3,000-mile trail project, biking and walking from Maine to Florida, going down the East Coast through the major cities. So going where the people are, sort of parallel. The Appalachian Trail has a similar idea of going across states, but we're going down the coast. So in here, in Delaware County, we follow the Delaware River. So looking at the primary trail network, as talked about earlier, you can see and mention that most of these trails in Delaware County follow the stream. So you can see all the waterways kind of threading through the county, coming down to the Delaware River. They all follow those stream beds, old rail that follow the streams until you get down to the Delaware River. And you can see we're right off of the Delaware River there. The Industrial Heritage Trail is sort of a budding trail. It only has a couple of small pieces that are built so far. We'll get into those, but basically you can see that we are buffered a little bit off of the river, and what's in there is the industrial land uses that are there. And so if anyone's familiar with that area, obviously you have lots of jobs, lots of people, but also lots of areas that don't make themselves necessarily friendly for people coming and getting access to the water. So we're trying to, create a balance between that. So if you've seen in Northeast Philly, there's some trails that are coming along the Delaware River that are right next to old industrial uses, and they're coexisting, and it's working out. This is also a way for people to get to work. It's a way for people to get outside and learn about the industrial heritage of the landscape. So here it is in the broader circuit network. The circuit trails, again, is this network of trails in both New Jersey and Pennsylvania in the Philadelphia region. So we form a major part of that corridor. The yellow highlighted is the East Coast Greenway coming in from Trenton and Princeton up in Mercer County, and then coming down through Philly, through Bucks into Philly. We do have a complementary trail on the New Jersey side, so we have two parallel trails along the Delaware. We cut across through Spring Garden, through Center City, follow the Schuylkill River Trail down into Delaware County by way of Cobbs Creek and the John Hines Refuge. And this is zooming way out, 3,000 miles from Maine to Florida. This is an ambitious, long-term, long-distance project, but it's happening up and down the region, up and down the coast. So there are other coordinators like myself spotted throughout this corridor. So we have one in Florida, we have one for Georgia and South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. I'm the Mid-Atlantic, so I look at this trail and similar trail networks like the circuit in DC, Baltimore, Annapolis, Wilmington, Delaware, in Philly here, but then also up in Trenton and New Jersey. So it's about 33% done, which is 1,000 miles. That's a lot of trail that are already out there right now. People are using them. They might not know about it, but because it's sort of in process, we don't have a big profile yet. We're sort of under the radar. So as we climb up in percentage and as trail segments link together, it'll be easier to tell the story because you can actually go out and use it more continuously. So around the area, you can see the dotted lines are some of those gaps. You can see coming in from New Jersey, there's already the DNR trail, if you're all familiar with the canal trail, that goes 35 miles up the canal, through Princeton, through New Brunswick, comes down into Trenton here on that map, and then follows the DNL, which is that next long segment. There's a little bit of gap south of Bristol, but we're working on that. And then there's spotted trails, through Philly and then down into Delaware County. And then just beyond that, Delaware itself is over 60% complete. So it's really coming together. It's sort of like a Polaroid develops. It's not all at once. It's not linear from top to bottom, but little pieces at a time. And then closer in, you can see the trails that are built. So the Refuge Trail, probably familiar with, there's 10 miles of trails in that network. There's about 4 miles that we follow down to 420 there, which is a tough crossing. So a lot of these trails, the problem is that they're isolated, and they're isolated by really difficult to bike and walk stretches of roadway. And that's really the challenge in this area, especially because a lot of this area, in Chester and these townships nearby, a lot of people don't have access to vehicles, and so transportation is essential. This is more of a useful one. It's not necessarily the pretty creek corridors that you're walking through and the landscape. This is a practical trail that will be transportation heavy. But we do have some nature right by. John Hines Refuge, 4 miles long. It's beautiful. It is pretty rough. It can be rough after it rains. Gravel, rocky. So make sure that you have gear for that. But this is an example of kind of what's coming. So Tinicum spent a long time and a lot of sweat getting through the bureaucratic processes to get this trail. And this is, it's not even a mile, but it's showing you kind of the environment that you could have, even though you're right next to 291 Industrial Highway, which is what its name means. Like, it feels that way. But if you have some trees, you have some signage, you can make people feel like they're walking along a linear park rather than right next to asphalt and basic glass and whatever debris that you might find. So you can clean it up and make it look actually really nice. The next piece of trail, you might be familiar with the stadium down by Commodore Berry Bridge. This is the Chester City Waterfront Trail. This is a beautiful trail, and it's right by the stadium, but also the converted Pico station that now has lots of businesses there. So people are out on this trail every day. You take a walk for lunch. You just get some fresh air. This is the amenity that it can provide for people in that area. And then in the region, you already have all these trails that are coming together. So you're familiar with this one, only so many blocks away from us here. This is again the Tinicum Township side path down here by the Chester City Riverfront. And then in Delaware, over the border, you're not far away from a beautiful forested trail through many of the state parks they have there, the Northern Delaware Greenway. Coming into Wilmington, the Wilmington Riverwalk, they have a beautiful, redeveloped industrial space, not unlike all the spaces we see in Philly, that leads now to the Jack Markell Trail, which just opened up. And has anyone gotten a chance to ride it or walk it? That's great. Okay, yeah. Well, I highly, highly recommend going out and checking it out. It's about 7 miles from Wilmington to Newcastle. Beautiful trail. This boardwalk goes over the refuge there, the Russell Peterson Wildlife Refuge. This is the environmental center right on the water.
The name of the trail?
The Jack Markell Trail.
Jack?
Markell. He is the former governor of Delaware, who is a big part of the reason that so much funding was able to be secured for this trail. This was actually a DELDOT project. This is a transportation trail, which is great because people in Newcastle can now bike up to Wilmington, that 7 miles along the most gorgeous stretch of old railroad and wetland. So that's what we're trying to transform, these areas. So these are the gaps we're dealing with. This is sort of the environment that you're facing right now. You have, it's not age friendly, only the sort of fearless cyclists are going to be riding it, and even those I don't think are enjoying it. So you have major trucking. Obviously this is an industrial area, so you're going to have a lot of heavy vehicles. Exit ramps, on-ramps, off-ramps from all the highways crisscrossing the corridor. We do have some bike lanes through Marcus Hook, so at least that's shown the transformation, a buy-in to this idea that it's not just about vehicles. So working on that, there's a study, one of the major ones is looking at the right-of-way along 291 because there's not a lot of space through those properties. We're looking for just a little bit of width, and we only need like another 5 or 10 feet in some places to have a side path wide enough for both walking and biking, a little bit of buffer from all the cars going 40 to 50 miles per hour on the stretch or worse. That's what we're trying to figure out. How do we get those pieces of land, and that might be easements, that might be buying property in some areas, and a lot of this is built on, some of it's vacant, so it's a patchwork effort going on. And there's also the mentioned study beforehand about the maintenance. That's a big part of this, is getting these townships to buy in means that they have to have a plan. How are we going to keep this up? How do we have the money to maintain it? It's going to be weathered, over time, so you need to have that plan in place. So that could be some partnerships. There's a whole consortium of businesses and institutions along here called the Riverfront Alliance of Delaware County. So that includes like Boeing, Widener University, the Crozier Health System. There's a number of major players in this area that could benefit from that. So we're working to try to help them realize that this is their future, and this benefits everybody. Again, there's the bike lanes here. This could be, become protected bike lanes in the future. We could work on that. Tinicum's working on their own sort of network of trails. They've really bought into the idea that trails will connect people, will make it a more, a friendlier environment for younger families to come in who want to have access to trails for their kids and connect to the refuge. So we really need help. Obviously, this is a call to action for all these trails, for the circuit trails, and for the East Coast Greenways. So you can find out more about the ones I talked about, greenway.org. We have a mapping tool, shows you where we go right now. And so that'll show what trails exist and where we have some of those on-road stretches, some of which aren't as nasty as some of the industrial parts, but go through like downtown areas like Wilmington, low stress kind of riding, and then you can email me there. We also have an East Coast Greenway Pennsylvania committee meeting coming up on November 16th. It's at DVRPC. It's in the afternoon, so it's not the greatest time, but if you can make it, that would be great. Again, email me, let me know if you're interested. And then we have a bigger event, the summit. This is a Mid-Atlantic Regional Greenways and Trails Summit, so we want to get trail leaders, planners, fans of trails, public health, parks and recreation, anyone interested in trails to come to Philly in April 4th to 6th. This will be a big summit, try to get everybody out onto trails, having walks, having rides, but then also listening to each other from DC, from Baltimore, Wilmington, New York, trying and figuring out their stories, what has worked, what hasn't worked. So we want to bring them all together. And that's me.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to have a brief panel discussion, and then we're going to have some Q&A from you folks in the audience as well. So first, I guess I had a question for John first from Chester Creek. You said it took 23 years or so to get this first segment in, but now we're seeing this segment's in design, this segment's in engineering, this segment's moving. So things seem to be moving much faster now. And is that just a result?
They'll come. Once they saw how great the first section was, everybody wanted to be there. We did a trail survey, and 40% of our users on that particular day were from Aston, even though Aston didn't want to build a trail yet. So if you can build a good segment, I think that'll be the example for other folks.
So sort of nothing speaks louder than a completed trail, even if it's short.
Yes.
For Steve from Delaware County, can you speak a little bit more to the challenges, because Delaware County has a lot of very narrow roadways. There's not a lot of cartway for bike lanes. So can you speak to the sort of challenges behind getting the trail network integrated into a larger transportation network for the county?
Yeah, that was one of the goals of our transportation plan. I didn't work on that directly. That was the work of some other transportation planners in our department, so I was sort of speaking of that secondhand. But we want to see that the trail network connects to the road network, and that there are certain corridors. And they told me that there were corridors that either, maybe not necessarily on the roadways, but might be parallel to certain high-trafficked and often traveled roadways for both cars and bikes. And these corridors might not be the best. They might not have the best width of shoulders and width for both cars and bicycles to share, but on the actual roadway. But they're the most direct routes often between two places. So we want to see them become usable for both cars and bikes and connected to the trail network.
So it sounds like you're kind of saying that you're looking to identify a low-stress network of maybe some back streets that run parallel to be able to then funnel people into the circuit trails and the other county trails that once you're on those, you're sort of separated from traffic.
Right. Yeah, neither trails nor the road network can do it all, and we already have the road network, so we might as well utilize it.
Right.
Yeah.
Sean, you work, so a lot of groups are about a specific creek, and regardless of the number of municipalities it's in. You have a different approach. You work in the trails that are in Upper Darby, and there are several trails that you work with. But we've come to know each other somewhat well in the last year, and you've told me a lot about the mayor in Upper Darby. Can you tell me a little bit more about the political situation in Upper Darby and how you've managed to get the mayor and the council so pro-trail?
Well, I mean, I think mostly it's because a lot of people in our community, they like the trails, and if you get a bunch of people out to show support for the trails, the politicians will follow, and the mayor and the county have been really good with pushing this issue. I mean, they see that a lot of their constituents want the trail. I guess we've had this Chester Creek Trail and the Radnor Trail, and once the people from our community see how much these other people in the community use the trails, they want to go back to their local leaders and say, we want this kind of stuff. I guess, does that answer the question?
Well, I found it kind of remarkable that, when people think of Upper Darby, they don't think of the highest income community with tons of resources for building trails, and yet the township itself, they're spending municipal money to build trails, and a lot of very wealthy municipalities refuse to do that. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, I mean, I think luckily a lot of the trails we've been working with have also been on county land, so we've been able to, or the township has been able to leverage the work that the county, the money the county's been able to put in, and state funds that they've been able to put in to bring these kind of things. And also, the township has been working with developers that have come in, like the Drexel Line Shopping Center. So it's not just the municipal money that's being spent, that these outside commercial companies can come in and put in the trails, which is good for the township, but then it's also good for the developers, because it's easier for people to come and use the shops that they're building. So sort of leveraging it that way as well.
So just to clarify, you have developers that are paying for a segment of trail on their property,
That is correct.
paying for the complete construction of the trail,
Yes.
because they see it sort of in their interest to have more people have access to their property and so forth.
Exactly. I mean, if you have a bunch of neighborhoods close by to your stores, giving them trails to make it easy for the people to get to the stores, they'll sell more stuff. So I think they see the benefit of it. And the township has worked closely with these developers to make sure that they're putting in these type of amenities, and not just the trails, but various sidewalks and different roadways to make it a more pedestrian-friendly area.
Daniel, so you work at the East Coast Greenway. You're working from even beyond a regional perspective, because you're working on trails that are outside of our region, but specifically in Chester City, which is it's a historically distressed community. They've gone through several rounds of austerity, trying to stabilize basically they can't afford to put tires on the police cars, right? What are some of the challenges in getting that segment of trail built in a community that has so many other challenges that like a trail might not be the highest thing on their priority list?
I mean, I think the trail might not be the highest thing on the priority list of the money that's being spent. Like, you definitely want to fund basic services,
Right.
but it's a high priority for folks living in Chester. With the open space plan that they've recently are finishing up with Pennsylvania Environmental Council's help. Trails, I went into a few of those meetings, and everybody, they know what they want, and they're using the parks that are in Chester right now. I think the issue with the East Coast Greenway is that it's separated. 291 is not a friendly, place to play. Like, you don't want to go there to enjoy, barbecue or hanging out by the river, because you're faced with this traffic that's going back and forth. So the problem is that people are definitely going to prioritize the trails or the parks that are closer to them than the riverfront, or that are more accessible. So I think access is a big part of it, and if you can make the case that this isn't just about recreation, this is about public health. You look at the public health issues that they're dealing with. A trail is an answer to that. If you look at trying to encourage businesses to start, you can look at some of the ways that can be done in a way that doesn't displace businesses but encourages local entrepreneurs. So I think it's turning it on its head and looking at the different priorities of Chester, like listening and learning about what they're dealing with and figuring out how trail can answer that rather than come first with the trail.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to open discussion. I know some folks had questions. And sir, you had your hand raised from
Yes,
back
yes,
when. So go ahead.
and you kind of added to that, and you guys seem to be talking past each other about what's going on in Delaware County. You mentioned that there's a plan for roadways between these segments. And you were talking about, making sure that they're pushed off the major highways onto some surface streets. That's going to require some signage.
Yeah.
Is there a plan for there to be signage to lead people to these segments, between the segments, so that these, so that people can use them, and not just have to drive their cars and, take their bicycles and park there?
So the question, just so we can make sure we get it on the audio and everybody can hear, is about signage on some of these connecting roadways to get to trails.
Yeah, I can't say from what I know if there is a recommendation in the transportation plan for signage in particular, but we'd have to go back and look. Like I said, I wasn't one of the planners that worked directly on that, but that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't build a 276 or a freeway without having people sign to get there.
Right.
It's a good point too, because Upper Darby has some kind of hidden trails, like trying to get down to Kent Dog Park, getting a little bit more signage from the county to let people know how you can get there would be helpful.
I can tell you that signage on the trail is something that has been worked on the trails that the county will oversee. It was just this year, in the past 2 years, I guess, that the county did a signage manual and signage inventory for its county parks and the trails that the county oversees. We worked with a consultant to actually design a new family of signs, and you're going to see them start to pop up through county parks and trails over the next few years.
I think we've also got signage for what's known as Bicyclist Baltimore Pike.
Correct.
I believe the Bicycle Coalition had a lot to do with that.
We did a lot of work through our Delaware County affiliate at the time, identifying a parallel route to Baltimore Pike that folks could use. The issue now is the signage is reaching at the end of its lifespan and needs a lot of refreshing. We had a staff member who rode down to Chester to go to a Philadelphia Union game along a route that we found the like lowest stress route to get to Chester City. And he said he had a really hard time finding and staying on Bicyclist Baltimore Pike without his cue sheet from us. So your point is well raised, that we do not only need to create new signage for this is the lowest stress route to get to this safer trail corridor, but also to refresh the existing signage. Because I think there's a lot of like, oh, we built it and now we're done. But maintenance is one of those things that isn't as fun to plan for, but we need to start looking at that for a lot of our.
I mean, there is good signage to Swarthmore, from the city, but it needs to be refreshed.
Right.
It's also holding the state accountable, because PA Bike Route E is on Industrial Highway. You would think that you would recommend folks going to the stadium to take Bike Route E, but you wouldn't.
We have been recommending that PennDOT remove all of its signage for all of its state bike routes from all of its bike routes, because many of them are quite
Matter of holding
dangerous.
them accountable. Yeah.
We should not be we don't recommend people use, as a blanket, as a generalized statement, that people use the Pennsylvania state.
We should give them a
bike routes.
conditional and say improve it or remove it.
Yes, yes. And like Bike Route E is a classic example of a route that I would never take to get anywhere in Southwest Philadelphia.
Which is the East Coast.
Right. And so that's like a recurring issue that we're having with PennDOT. They spend a lot of money and put a lot of effort into signing this network, but all over the state we hear about segments that are very dangerous and not recommended for cyclists.
Totally.
Yes, you had a question?
Yes, so I had a question about, and Dan, you kind of alluded to this a bit, of the outreach for once the trails are established. So you kind of mentioned the idea that if you build it, they will come, which is true, but for a segment of those that are, bike enthusiasts or often travel to trails, or even those that know about it. So I wanted to hear some of the outreach strategies or plans for a lot of the neighborhoods that these trails run through, as well as the community members, to get them engaged in using the trail. How are you marketing to those segments of community that don't necessarily bike often, but could be able to see biking as a means for access in their daily lives?
So the question was about, once the trail is built, how do you ensure that not just bike enthusiasts find it? How do you ensure that the community at large that live close enough to it are able to find it and get to it and feel welcome there? So who wants to field that one?
We've used newspaper articles, and that got people out very quickly when our trail opened.
So you found a big difference just the newspaper article coming out?
Yeah, the article would come out, and like next weekend, there'd be like scads of people. So it was. We've also had public meetings during the development process, so that's another opportunity to inform the local population about the trail.
I hear a lot about trails just on social media, about people posting things and it goes viral. And
Actually, I understand the Delaware County government actually looks at our Facebook page.
Yeah.
So that's good news.
I guess, do you see more so, I get that there's a lot of people on the trails, but do you see a lot of those community members, especially kind of as Leonard alluded to, those who don't have cars or need the trail as a transport way to walk or bike safely from point A to point B? Do you see a lot of those community members? Yeah, or even not even for community, for health or recreation or whatever means, but just the variety of people on the trail.
Say in Tinicum.
I mean,
yeah.
I've definitely seen that when Sean took me for a walkthrough of the Darby Creek Trail. That trail happens to go through, it straddles Upper Darby, which is like a moderate income community, and Clifton Heights, which is a very low income community. And there's a mill pond there. And the day that we went there were, I would say conservatively, 100 people in the pond. And these were not cycle enthusiasts at all. These were folks who had walked down, they had walked and swam across the creek from Clifton Heights, or walked across the mill dam. There was someone had attached a rope to a tree, and people were doing backflips off the rope into the creek. And it was like a beautiful moment, because there were people from both sides of this creek coming together. Everybody's wading in the water. There were kids there. There were folks drinking beers, but keeping it, keeping it discreet. And that was, to me, the gold standard for what a trail should look like. But that just happens to be that it came right through those communities. And folks, I think, already had an experience of finding those little swimming holes and getting there, but the trail just made it that much easier for folks.
In Chester, I know that, you talk about people in the water, all these are related to water, and fishing is huge. Getting boat access to the Delaware River is huge. So in those meetings, some of the open houses that Pennsylvania Environmental Council had, Chester come out, basically talk about how they use the trails. If they knew about the Waterfront Trail, a lot of folks did, but it was kind of a hassle to get there because you would have to literally drive yourself over because you weren't going to walk that way. So I think learning from whoever's nearby, what do they want to use it for? What could it be used for? What partnerships, I guess. Learning that, and then trying to figure out ways, whether it's a community event, like it doesn't have to just be like we're having a bike event, we're having whatever you want to, like we're having a fishing derby or something, changing it up.
We've had presentations at Middletown Day, at Aston Day, with a booth, and we tell people about it, so that's another opportunity to.
Sir, you had a question?
Greenway question. What the hell's a Polaroid? Just kidding. What is the longest completed continuous section of the Greenway at this point? Where is it at?
So technically, it's in Maine, and it's really rough. It's 85 miles. It's the Down East Sunrise Trail, but that you would need like a pretty heavy-duty gravel bike.
I think it's from Humboldt out to Key West.
Well, that's another really long section. That might be like a couple miles
130 miles.
less.
That's completed and continuous as well?
So yeah, Florida and the Keys, there's a really long 80 miles. Or so. I mean, there might be a couple small gaps to another tens of miles segment, but those are the really long ones on the whole corridor. Around here, if you take, once there's a couple of gaps in the DNL from Bristol up to Morrisville, Trenton, once those are filled in, you'll go about 45 miles up to New Brunswick by way of DNL to DNR.
And you said it does utilize the Schuylkill River Trail, is that what it's called?
It does, yeah.
And I just moved back to Philadelphia after 10 years. I used to go out to Valley Forge all the time. So to get through, you still use the Manningham towpath to connect with the river drives, I guess, to get up to the Valley Forge path? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.
All right, I think we have time for one more question, and then we still have a little bit of time afterwards so folks can have individual discussions while we set up for the next one. But, sir?
How about electric bikes on the trails? County, state, any rules yet?
You're going to be right on time for our panel at noon, where we have a whole we have a whole panel on that. I guess we still have time for one more. Yes, sir.
More of a construction and related question, but also linked to your reference to trail maintenance over the years. Those of us who've ridden trails, some are old, some are new. Some hold up well, some don't, particularly in the Northeast with our climate. Are there standards of any kind for trail construction that tend to yield better or not as good, long-lasting features, for example, preventing the typical heaves and expansion joints that appear in trails? If somebody were to ask, hey, we're thinking of building a trail, is there some place we can go to find out, here's how you should do it?
And you guys want to fill this one, or should I take a stab at it?
I've been told that you should keep trees 10 feet away from the edge of the trail so that the roots don't heave it up. If it's paved with macadam, it lasts a lot longer than gravel. If you deck a bridge with something other than wood, it's a lot longer lasting, obviously. These are a couple of things that I can think of.
There is a guide that a lot of trail funders insist that you stick to. That's the AASHTO standards. So.
And the AASHTO standard does cover things like the grade of the trail as far as how far up it goes, the grade of the land around it, and if there's potential for washouts, dealing with that and building a culvert proactively so you don't have a washout in that heavy storm. But having said that, I think the Darby Creek, that new segment got built, and then there was a washout within 6 months, right?
So I mean, going by the creeks, you often have a problem with washouts. So one thing that we've been advocating for, and the county and the township has been doing, is putting in more floodplains, further setbacks from the creeks, and that prevents some of the worst of the flooding from happening, which will help protect some of your creeks. So the more you get those floodplains in place and increase the setbacks and reduce the pervious space in the area close to the creek, does mitigate it a little bit.
That trail in Kent Park gets very wet from Darby Creek whenever it floods up.
Yeah.
And think the next phase is going down into an area that we're gonna have to look into wetland permitting and possibly using boardwalk that would be elevated.
Well, this is the end of our official time. I just wanted to give one last plug. If you liked this conversation and want to see more of them like this, we're having a suburban forum for the PA suburbs in Norristown on the 17th. We're going to have a panel about e-bikes. We're going to talk about the status of the circuit trails in the 4 suburban counties. So we'll have Steve will be here along with his counterparts from the other 3 Pennsylvania counties. We'll have an e-bike, and hopefully we're still working on getting Bird, but we might get Bird scooters to be there in the parking lot to have demonstrations of what e-scooters are all about. It's very accessible. It's right on the Schuylkill River Trail, and I hope to see everybody there. If you'd like to get more information, you can grab a postcard here from me. And the rest of the panel here will all be available for individual discussions for a few minutes while I get us set up for the e-bike panel, which is happening in this room at noon. Thank you, everybody.